At 3 in the morning, when the world sleeps, some awaken for an encounter that could change everything. Kathryn Kuhlman had been dead for over 40 years when they discovered something extraordinary hidden within her personal Bible. A handwritten prayer. Words penned by the hand of Smith Wigglesworth, the man who raised 14 people from the dead. But why this prayer? And why at 3 a.m.? Have you ever felt there's something more? Something that the great men and women of God knew. And you didn't? Kathryn Kuhlman felt it too. She knew Smith Wigglesworth held a secret she guarded until her dying day. Today, you'll discover that secret. Smith Wigglesworth wasn't an ordinary man. When he entered a room, the presence of God came with him. The paralyzed walked. The blind saw. The dead were resurrected. But Wigglesworth had a habit few knew. Every single day, for over 50 years, he woke at 3 in the morning to pray. 3 in the morning is no accident. It's no coincidence. Jesus died at 3 in the afternoon. The veil of the temple tore at 3 in the afternoon, the darkest hour before the dawn. At 3 in the morning, the spiritual world is closer. It's when demons operate with greater force, but also when God answers with more power. Wigglesworth knew this, and Kathryn discovered it. They met only once. In 1947, 2 years before Wigglesworth's death, she was a young evangelist struggling to understand her calling. He was the man most feared by demons on the face of the earth. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Only they knew what was said. But now we know something more. When Kathryn died in 1976, her Bible was placed in a private museum. For decades, nobody opened it. It was too sacred, too personal, until an authorized researcher finally examined it in 2018 and found something that changed everything. We thought we knew about these two giants of faith. Between the pages of Isaiah 55 lay a handwritten sheet, the unmistakable script of Smith Wigglesworth, a prayer. Not just any prayer, the prayer he offered at 3 in the morning, the same prayer that transformed an illiterate plumber into the most powerful man of his generation. Do you want to know what was written on that page? Before revealing it, you need to understand something about Smith Wigglesworth. He wasn't perfect. He was gruff, sometimes harsh, completely different from Kathryn. She was gentle, full of compassion. He was like a consuming fire. But they both had something in common. They knew how to pray in a way that opened the heavens. Wigglesworth often said something that disturbed many people. He said he'd rather die than live a day without God's presence. For him, it wasn't dramatic. It was literal. That's why he got up at 3 in the morning. Not out of discipline, not out of religiosity, out of absolute necessity. Imagine the scene. Every single day, at precisely 3 a.m., Wigglesworth's feet touched the cold floor of his room. He didn't turn on a light. He didn't need to. He knew that prayer by heart. The same words that changed his life when he was still an ordinary man, working with his hands, without formal education. And the same words Kathryn Kuhlman treasured as her most precious possession. But there's more. The way this prayer came into her hands reveals something extraordinary about both of them. Smith Wigglesworth didn't give advice easily. He wasn't a man of many words outside the pulpit. But in that 1947 meeting, something happened. Something that made a man who rarely wrote pick up a pen and paper. Kathryn recounted years later to a close friend. Wigglesworth looked into her eyes and said something that shook her. He said he saw in her the same fire that God had placed in him years before, but he also saw the same danger, the same risk of cooling, of losing the flame. That's when he wrote the prayer. "Girl," he said, "this prayer has kept me spiritually alive for 50 years. Keep it, use it, and never, ever stop praying at 3 in the morning. It's at that hour that God separates the genuine from the religious." Have you ever wondered why some Christians live a life of supernatural power and others struggle to feel God for 5 minutes? Why some move mountains and others can't even move themselves? The difference isn't in talent. It's not in education. It's not even in faith. The difference is in intimacy. And intimacy is built in the wee hours, when only you and God are awake. Wigglesworth discovered this by accident. In 1876, he was 26, and his life was falling apart. His business was failing. His marriage was in crisis. His children were sick. He was a Christian, but a nominal Christian. He went to church, but God seemed distant until one night that changed everything. He couldn't sleep. It was 3 a.m, and an unexplainable anguish consumed him. He got out of bed and started pacing the house. He didn't know what to do. He didn't even know how to pray properly. So he knelt in the living room and started talking to God like he'd never spoken before. It wasn't a pretty prayer. It wasn't theologically correct. It was the desperate cry of a man who had reached the end of himself. And God answered. God's presence filled that room in a way Wigglesworth had never experienced. He literally felt the weight of glory. He started to cry and couldn't stop. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of liberation, of encounter. In that pre-dawn hour, at 3 o'clock, Smith Wigglesworth was born again. For real. From that day on, he couldn't sleep past 3 a.m. without first meeting with God. It became a physical need, like breathing, like drinking water. He needed those moments in the presence, and it was in those pre-dawn hours that God began to teach him things that no school could teach. The first miracle happened 3 months later. A neighbor's daughter was dying of a fever. The doctors said there was nothing more they could do. Wigglesworth had never prayed for healing in his life, but that night, at 3 a.m, God spoke to him, a voice clear as a bell. Go pray for the girl. He knew it wasn't his imagination. In the last 3 months, these morning conversations with God had become more real than anything else in his life. He got up, went to the neighbor's house, and rang the doorbell at 3:30 a.m. The girl's father received him in despair. Wigglesworth entered the room where the child was agonizing. He laid his hands on her and prayed the prayer God had taught him in those pre-dawn hours. The fever broke instantly. The girl opened her eyes and asked for water. Wigglesworth returned home knowing his life would never be the same. God had found a man willing to wake up at 3 a.m, and now he would use that man to shake nations. But the prayer, what was the prayer? Kathryn Kuhlman spent 30 years fully understanding what Smith Wigglesworth had given her. She began waking at 3 a.m. shortly after their 1947 meeting. At first, it was difficult. She wasn't a morning person, but something in the way Wigglesworth spoke about that hour convinced her it was important. In the first few months, she simply read the prayer, repeating each word. It was beautiful, but she didn't understand its power until the night something extraordinary happened. It was March 1948. Kathryn was going through one of the most difficult crises of her ministry. Criticism came from every direction. They questioned her authority. They questioned her gifts. They questioned whether a woman could truly be used by God in that way. She was devastated. That pre-dawn hour at 3 a.m., she woke as usual. But instead of just reading Wigglesworth's prayer, she began to cry. She cried for 2 straight hours. And it was while weeping that she understood. The prayer wasn't about words. It was about surrender. Smith Wigglesworth had discovered that at 3 a.m., when all defenses are down, when all pride is asleep, the human heart can completely surrender to God. And in that total surrender, God finds room to act. The prayer was a vehicle. The fuel was brokenness. And Kathryn was broken. That morning at 5 a.m., when she finished praying, Kathryn Kuhlman was different. She had found the same God that Smith Wigglesworth had encountered 70 years earlier. The same God who was waiting for anyone willing to wake at 3 a.m. and completely surrender. 3 months later, the miracles began. Miracles that would mark Kathryn's ministry for the next 30 years. But you still don't know what the prayer said. And there's a reason for that. Because prayer without the heart doesn't work. Words without surrender are just words. Smith Wigglesworth could have taught his prayer to 1,000 people. Only a few would have it work. Only those willing to pay the pre-dawn price. Kathryn Kuhlman paid that price. For 30 years she woke at 3 a.m. For 30 years she prayed that prayer. And for 30 years, God used a woman many rejected to manifest his power in a supernatural way. When she died in 1976, people were still trying to understand the secret of her ministry. They saw the miracles, they saw the crowds, they saw the power, but they didn't see the 3 a.m. They didn't see the dark room where a woman broke before God every day, holding a handwritten page from a man she had met only once. And you? Are you ready to know what was written on that page? Because once you know, there will be no more excuses. Once you discover what Smith Wigglesworth prayed at 3 a.m. and what Kathryn Kuhlman repeated for 3 decades, you'll have a choice to make. You can continue sleeping until 7, 8 in the morning, praying 5 minutes before coffee, asking God to bless your plans, or you can join those who wake at 3 a.m. to discover God's plans. A choice that will define not only your ministry, but your entire spiritual life. Smith Wigglesworth used to say something that disturbed the preachers of his time. He said that most Christians pray for blessings, but true intercessors pray for problems. Problems only God can solve. Impossible situations that force the supernatural to manifest. He wasn't being dramatic. He was being real. The 3 a.m. prayer wasn't about comfort. It was about confrontation. Confrontation with one's own soul. Confrontation with fears. Confrontation with the spiritual mediocrity that satisfied most, but never satisfied men like Smith Wigglesworth. And that was the first thing you noticed when reading the handwritten prayer. It didn't begin by asking for blessings. It began with a confession few Christians would have the courage to make. Kathryn Kuhlman realized this on the first reading.